My name is Karita Fly, and I gave birth to my son, Isaac Alexander, at 26 weeks. And I hope that by me sharing my story and my testament of God's faithfulness, that some other mom who is going through the same thing will find hope and strength in my story. Having blind faith in God will lead to miracles every time. That's probably the most important thing that I learned on our NICU journey. November 10th, 2017, I went in to see my high-risk OB just like every other week prior to that. I had an ultrasound done. Everything was perfectly normal. This is actually the ultrasound that I had that day. Perfectly healthy baby at 26 weeks. He was weighing in at 1 pound, 13 ounces. She told me the heart rate was great, everything was beautiful. So after the appointment, I went home just like normal, and I started to feel very uncomfortable, lower back pain, a lot of cramping. So I'm thinking in the back of my mind, like, this feels like labor pains, but it can't be. I just left the OB. She totally would have known if I was in labor. So at this point, I feel like I'm having contractions. So even though I'm thinking there's no way possible that I'm in labor, I decided to time the contractions. Sure enough, every 10 minutes on the clock, I had a contraction. So I called my sister. She was the closest one to me at that time. And she got me to labor and delivery. I got all checked in, and they hooked me up to all the monitors and everything. And the nurse tells me there's no way that I'm having contractions because there's absolutely nothing on the screen. And I'm telling her that I currently feel a contraction, and she's telling me there's nothing on the screen. So finally the OB comes in and she goes, okay, we'll just check you and see what's going on. Now at 21 weeks, I received an emergency cervical cerclage. So when she checked me, she told me that she still felt the cerclage. It was still perfectly in place, but she could also feel my son's foot, and I was about 5 centimeters dilated. So I needed to have an emergency C-section. At this point, everything started moving pretty fast. I received several steroid shots, signed papers. The NICU team came down to talk to me about what to expect with giving birth at 26 weeks. So I get back to the operating room pretty quickly. However, I did not have a very smooth delivery. My heart rate got really high. The anesthesia wore off. I was feeling the pain. I hemorrhaged. I lost a lot of blood. Ended up needing a blood transfusion. After I went into recovery, I was still bleeding, and that's when they decided to do the transfusion. So I had about a 4-day hospital stay, and this entire time it's not really registering to me that my son is up in the NICU and that when it's time to go, he has to stay. So discharge day came, and as I'm getting dressed, it hit me that I was going to be leaving the hospital, but my son was not, and that's when a complete breakdown happened. That was probably the first time I really cried about the whole situation. Because you have this picture in your head when you think about, having a child. You go to the hospital at 40 weeks, you deliver. When it's time to go home, you all go home as a family. But this was not my reality, and it just did not seem natural. So I'm trying to cope with the fact that this is not what's going to happen for me. I have to leave my child here in the care of complete strangers. Now, on the way home, I'm thinking to myself that, why is this happening to me? Why is this what God chose for me? And I suddenly remembered the quote, that God will let no pain be wasted. And I let that sink in for a little bit. Because God is so strategic, and He is so intentional about what He does. And there's always going to be purpose in your pain. Now, I know it doesn't seem like that when you're going through the situation, but that's something that I have truly learned. Now, on the beginning of our NICU journey, everything was totally normal. My son was actually doing so well that the doctors told me that he'd probably go home at 36 weeks, as long as he was off of oxygen and bottle feeding or breastfeeding, whatever I chose, he would probably get discharged at 36 weeks. And so we were right on point. He was doing great, got to 34 weeks, and the doctors called me and they said that we're pretty sure Isaac is sick, but we're not sure what's going on. And so they said we'll do a flu test and we'll do an RSV test. So 24 hours go by and they call back and they tell me the flu test was negative, but unfortunately the RSV test was positive. And those are 3 letters that you never want to hear after the words, your preemie has. So the doctor explained to me how difficult this would probably be on his body, because even for full-term babies or toddlers, RSV is still a very serious virus. So for a 34-weeker who is probably less than 4 pounds at this point, they had no idea how this would play out. So they told me for about 7 to 10 days he would probably be pretty sick, but after that we should start to see progress. So eventually they did have to re-intubate him. His breathing wasn't doing so well. So they kind of told me that that's normal, you know, when children have RSV, especially children that small. However, at about day 10, the doctor told me that they were seeing no progress, that nothing was getting better. They actually felt like he was getting worse, which is not what they were expecting at all. So the next day, which is a Sunday morning, January of this year, the doctor called me and he asked me, you know, if I was able to come in. And I said, well, yeah, I'll be there in a little bit, but, you know, I wasn't coming right now. And he said, well, I think you should come right now. We've worked on Isaac all night. We put him on the oscillator. An oscillator is just a very large ventilator that pretty much vibrates the baby's entire body to just keep things moving. And they had given him medication to paralyze him so that he wouldn't move and damage anything further. So he said to me, you know, we did all that and it's still not working. We still feel like he's not breathing on his own. And so I don't even know how I mustered up the strength to say these words, but I asked him, I said, so are you telling me that I need to come in because my son is dying? And he said to me, at this point, that's very likely. Now, from that point to me getting to the hospital is a complete blur, so I won't even pretend like I remember what happened at that point. But I remember arriving at the NICU, and I check in like I do any other time, and the receptionist calls back to the nurse, and, you know, Miss Fly is here for baby boy Fly, and I could hear the nurse tell her over the little walkie-talkie, she goes, don't let her come back yet. And so at this point, I feel completely devastated. I just feel sick because the doctor just told me to hurry up and get here, and now I'm here, and you're telling me I can't go back. So I'm for sure thinking I must be too late, that they lost him. So I'm sitting in the waiting area for about half an hour, and eventually the nurse comes out and she tells me that I can come back. But on the way back there, she's warning me that, you know, my son is not going to look how I'm used to seeing him. And she could not have been more right. He was so swollen and he was all blue. There was blood from them trying to get the tube in around his mouth and nose area. And he just was not moving. He was vibrating because of the oscillator, but he physically was not moving. And the doctor repeated the same thing to me. It's really not looking good. We're doing everything we can, and, you know, we'll keep working on it, but I don't know how much longer, you know, he'll be okay. And so I stayed at the hospital till about 7 p.m. that evening, and things still aren't looking so great, but, you know, he's still with us. So I was grateful for that. And my mom and my sisters were there with me in the waiting area, and they were just praying and speaking life into me and into Isaac and reminding me of God's word. And as they were doing that, I remembered why I chose the name Isaac for my son. Because in the Bible, Isaac was the promised son to his parents. He was not the sacrifice, but the promise. And after prior losses, I knew that this was my promised son. And I had to remind myself of that in that moment, that God was not going to take him away from me because he was not a sacrifice, but a promise. And God does not lie. He stands firm on his word. So I had to do the same thing. So after a couple days, the doctors are telling me he's still not getting better. They don't know what else they can do. The best they could probably do at this point is transfer him to another hospital that has what they call an ECMO machine. So there's no way they would want to put a 34-weeker who's this critically ill on this machine, but that was the only chance they had at saving his life at this point. So I'm thinking to myself, I'm hearing what the doctor's telling me, but I'm thinking to myself, this will not be. God's not going to let it get to this point, because again, blind faith in God will lead to miracles every time. And that's what I had to keep reminding myself of. And after a few days, literally how they say, late in the midnight hour, God's going to turn it around. That's literally what happened for my son. He began to get better with no explanation at all. The doctors were completely amazed. The nurses could not believe it, because it had been 3 years, I believe they told me, since they had a baby in the NICU with RSV. And they don't even remember when the last time they had a baby that small survive RSV. So they were completely blown away, but I knew that it was God. And I knew that he was doing something, because, like I said before, he will not waste anything. There's always going to be a divine purpose for anything that you go through in life. Any pain that you feel, any tragedy that you experience, God is going to use it for something. And so I kept reminding myself of that. And as Isaac started to get better and he started to progress, and they told me, okay, well, he's better now, but you have to take him home on oxygen because his lungs are so damaged from the RSV and the pneumonia. So I'm like, okay, as long as I get to take my baby home, it's okay. Well, a week before they were planning to discharge him, the nurse that he had, she asked me, is there a reason why they hadn't tried him off of the oxygen? And I said, no, they just didn't want to because of all the damage from the RSV and pneumonia. And she said, well, I've been taking care of Isaac since he was born, and I know that he's strong enough to do this. He does not need this oxygen. If it's okay with you, I want to take him off today and see how he does. So I said, sure, let's give it a try. From that day to this one, Isaac has never been back on oxygen. So I thank God for that nurse, because she gave him a chance, and it's like God spoke to her in that moment and told her that he did not need that oxygen, and he did, and he did great. And so after that week, I was finally able to take him home. After 116 days in the NICU, my son was finally being discharged. I was getting to take him home. And walking into that elevator with my son was the first time in 116 days that I truly felt like I could breathe. And let me tell you, that was probably the sweetest breath that I had ever taken. Because when you're on the NICU journey, it's like you're on a roller coaster that you cannot get off of. And you're holding your breath, and you're holding your breath, and you're just waiting for that moment for it to stop. And for me, it had finally stopped. And so I asked God at that moment, once we got home and everything was kind of settled in, what is it that you want me to do with this story? Because I knew that it wasn't just for me. It wasn't about my son. There was a bigger purpose for this. Because God always has a divine purpose for anything that you go through. Your testimony is not always about you. Your testimony is about the person that's going to hear it and be set free. It's about the person whose prison will be unlocked because you've shared your story. And that's what I learned. After Isaac was discharged, I came across maybe 3 or 4 women back to back who had micropremies. And even my own cousin had her son a little early, and he was in the NICU for a little bit. And the fact that I was able to be there for them and support them and truly tell them I understand and I'm here for you meant so much to me, but it meant even more to them. So I understand now that God allowed me to walk that journey so that I can help other women who are going through the same thing. So to the mom who's currently in the NICU, sitting next to your child in that isolate or that crib, and you feel like you can't breathe, you feel like you are suffocating and you cannot take another step, at some point you will breathe again. You will get your joy back. You will get your peace of mind back. You will get your happiness back. And it's not going to be like it was before. It'll be even better. Because when God restores, he gives you a double portion. You're not going to get the same thing back. You're going to get something better. So just know that in due time, it's coming. Your greater is coming. There is light at the end of that tunnel, and soon enough you will see it. And to the mom who's just been discharged with her preemie and you go home and you feel like there's no way that you're equipped to take care of this child without the medical staff, just know that God chose you to raise one of his greatest miracles. He's graced you for this, he's equipped you for this, and you can handle it. Do not take it for granted that God chose you. He could have chosen anyone else, but you get to spend the rest of your life raising one of God's greatest miracles. And that is truly an honor and a privilege. Who is now a year old, and he was born weighing 1 pound 13 ounces. He is now 19 pounds and doing perfectly well. You want to say hi? Say hi.